They gave me glasses. And what's crazy about that to me is that means that I went about 7 years not knowing that there was a whole bunch of stuff that I couldn't see. You know, I'm shocked that I was not walking around like Mr. Magoo, bumping into walls and falling off of bridges and things. I remember once I already had my glasses, there were a bunch of times where I'd be watching TV, and I'd be watching cartoons, and I'd be sitting close to the TV because when I was a child, TVs tended to be smaller than they are now. And my mom would say this. I don't know if any of you had this experience. My mom would say, "Don't stand too close to the TV. It's going to ruin your eyesight." And I was like, "Too late, Mom. You guys did this to me. It was your DNA that made me have this terrible eyesight. I can't see anything." And it's gotten worse as I've gotten older. I don't know what this is like for you guys, but every single time I go into the eye doctor, it is humiliating. Humiliating. They show me one of these eye doctor tests, and I have it showing you one of these here. You've had to stand up, and you've had to try and read these things, and they have you cover an eye. And they give you one of these, these things that you cover your eye with and talk. Now, just so you know, this is a spoon that my son uses to eat yogurt, so I didn't have the real thing. But you cover your eye, and they tell me what you see. Pick the smallest line that you can look at and read out the letters and numbers to me. And so for me, I told you, I can't see anything. So I cover my eye, my contacts are out, and I look, and I'm basically looking at like the biggest line, and I start thinking, and I'm like, is it A, 7, fish, Egyptian hieroglyphic thing? I can't see anything. When I'm looking at it, it's more like I'm taking a Rorschach test. It's like I'm just seeing blots of ink, and I have to interpret what's there. But after I get everything wrong, the eye doctor puts this machine in front of me with the lenses all on, right? And he starts flipping through the lenses, and as he flips through them, he keeps asking, "What do you see? What do you see now? What do you see?" And as he starts to flip, the things that were blurry at the beginning, they start to become clear. I can start reading that top line and understanding what it is. But the thing that's even more wild to me than the blurry things becoming clear is that as they flip through better and better lenses, all of a sudden, lines of letters and numbers that I didn't even realize were there start to appear to me, and I start to be able to see them. My eyesight's so bad that there's stuff that I can't even see. It's right there in front of me, and I don't even know it's there. Sometimes I wonder what my life would be like if I had to live without glasses or contacts, what it would be like. And I think it would be pretty clear that it would be dangerous for me. There's not much that I could do because I'd be running into things that I can't see. I certainly couldn't drive. I probably wouldn't be able to read things very well. I wouldn't be able to cook or clean or fix things around the house. My wife's not here right now, but she'll tell you I don't do those things anyway, even when I can see. But there's so much that I wouldn't be able to do because my eyes cannot pick up what I'm supposed to be seeing. The human eye is actually really incredible when it's functioning properly. That God has designed it as a receptacle so that you can perceive what is there in front of you. And it's kind of crazy. I'm showing a little GIF to you here of what the human eye does. But when you're looking at something, so say, for example, I'm looking at a chair on the front row right now. What I'm seeing is light reflecting off of that chair. And so my eyes let me see where that chair is. And so the way it works is that light goes into the front of your eye, so into your pupil and into your cornea, and then your eye bends the light as it goes through until it gets to the back of your eye, the retina, and when your eye interprets these things correctly, it then sends an electrical impulse to your brain that shows you what the image is that's in front of you. God really did something incredible when making the human eye when it was made correctly. My eyes don't know how to bend light correctly, so I need help from a lens. But not even a healthy human eye can see everything. There's things that a human eye just cannot pick up. There's certain frequencies of light that you can't see. There's a lot of things in nature that we experience, maybe things that you can smell but you can't see, certain gases. There's a lot of jokes I can make there, but I'm not going to make them. But there's a lot of things that are there that you don't see with your eye. Another one of those things would be gravity. You feel the effects of gravity, but it's not a thing that you can see with your eye. The question that I want to ask you this morning, that in the same way there's certain things in the physical, material universe that you can't see with your eye, is it possible that there are things going on in your life and in the world around you that God is doing that you can't see? Is it possible that God is working on things that you just don't see at the moment? The passage we're going to read today tells us about a person who could see things that no one else can see, things that God was doing that no one else could. We're talking about the prophet Elisha. So we'll be reading from 2 Kings chapter 6. And what I'm about to do in the next couple minutes is going to be the most confusing part of this sermon, so you'll have to pay close attention to me. But we'll be reading about the prophet Elisha. Elisha saw some crazy things in his life. And where some of these crazy things he saw came from were in his time learning from the prophet before him. The prophet before him's name was Elijah. So here's what's confusing. I'm talking about two people with almost identical names, Elisha and Elijah. Elijah was a prophet of God who did ridiculous things during his lifetime. Some of the major events were he had a showdown with the prophets of Baal where they were going to see whose God would burn up an offering on an altar, and God rained down fire from heaven, burned up the altar, and then killed the prophets of Baal. Elijah was there when that happened. There's a whole bunch of events in his life where things like that happened. Well, as he got older, God told Elijah, it's time for you to give the mantle to the next prophet, and it's going to be this man named Elisha. And Elijah said, God, you're not being very creative now. These names are too similar. He didn't say that. I made that up. That's in my translation of the Bible. So Elisha becomes Elijah's protege. Elijah is his mentor. And we know that Elisha saw a few things in his life. Elisha shows up in 1 Kings chapter 18. And after that passage, there's a couple of crazy things that Elisha watches happen. One, watches an event happen where the king of Israel sent multiple companies of soldiers to Elijah. And each time, Elijah prayed, and God sent down fire from heaven and burned up the soldiers. So Elisha watched that happen. Even crazier is that Elijah told Elisha that my time here is not much longer. God's going to take me soon. And Elisha said, okay. And Elisha watched as God sent a chariot of fire and took Elijah up in a whirlwind into heaven. So Elijah didn't die. God took him to be in heaven, and Elisha watched it. So this guy saw some things. Now, I wonder if you had seen things like that in your lifetime, would you maybe have a unique perspective on the world? I would say yes. Seeing God do things that no one else has seen would probably give you a different lens through which to see the world around you. Well, in the chapter we're reading today, this is 2 Kings chapter 6, we see that God continued to allow Elisha to know things that no one else knew. So in this chapter, we find out that there's a king in a place called Aram. This is modern-day Syria, and he was an enemy of Israel. And so this king of Aram was sending soldiers, basically raiders, into different parts of Israel, and they would kill people, take their stuff, and run away. And so while this was happening, eventually God started telling Elisha where these raiders were coming before they came. Now, again, I'm not talking about the football team. I'm talking about soldiers from a different country. So God would tell Elisha, the raiders are coming to this place. Elisha would then go tell the king of Israel, hey, these guys are coming. You should probably put your soldiers there. So this happened over and over again until finally the king of Aram became upset and said, this guy knows even the things I'm whispering in my bedroom. I need to capture this guy or kill him. I won't be able to do the things that I want to do unless he's gone. So the king of Aram takes all of his soldiers and they go to the city where Elisha is. The city's called Dothan, and they surround it. They surround it by night. They're going to capture or kill this guy, and this is what we're going to read from. So this is 1 Kings chapter 6. We'll be starting in verse 14. It says this, therefore he, this is the king of Aram, sent horses and chariots and a great army there. And they came by night and surrounded the city. And when the servant of the man of God arose early and went out, there was an army surrounding the city with horses and chariots. And his servant said to him, alas, my master, what shall we do? So this servant of Elisha, the person who's going with him, maybe Elisha's protege, wakes up one morning, he gets his pot of coffee, he's feeling good about life, and he looks out and sees several hundred people ready to kill him. So he gets scared, and he goes and shakes and wakes up Elisha. Elisha just mumbles, what's the matter? And he says, there's an army there. And now we're going to read what Elisha says. So he, Elisha, answered, do not fear, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them. And Elisha prayed and said, Lord, I pray, open his eyes that he may see. Then the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw. And behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. So the man shakes him up, the servant. Elisha says to him, it's fine, the people who are with us are more than are with them. And the guy says, what are you talking about? There's just this army here. And Elisha prays, asks God to open the man's eyes. And so that young man has the eyes of his heart opened, and he sees what's actually happening. There's not just an army there to attack them. They're not just in this city. There are the hosts, the armies of the Lord, with chariots of fire surrounding Elisha. Elisha knew it. The young man didn't know it. No one else knew it. What goes on to happen in this story, we won't read the entire thing, but God essentially dumbfounds or blinds this army. Elisha tricks them and says, you're in the wrong city. You need to go 10 miles down the road. And then they walk down the road in a stupor because God had blinded them so that they couldn't see. The only person who could really see what was going on was Elisha. So here's my question. In the same way that Elisha could see things that no one else could see, he knew what God was doing when no one else did. Is it possible for us to see and know the things that God is doing when other people don't? Is it possible for us to have a keen eye to know what God is doing even when no one else does? Now, I'm not going to answer that question just yet. I want to answer another couple of questions first. And the first question is, what are the things that we can't see? Why sometimes do we not see what God is doing? Here's the first reason. We can't see the things that God has hidden. We can't see what God has hidden. There are some things that God is doing in the world that he holds close to the vest, that he's not going to let us know about right away. When Jesus was speaking in Matthew 24, he was talking about the time when he would return. And he says this, "But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, but my Father only." I'm going to repeat that. Jesus was saying about the time he returns, just in case anyone's ever tried to tell you that they know when Jesus is coming back. He says, no one knows the day or the hour, only my Father. There are certain things that God won't reveal until the time comes for him to reveal them. Moses says something similar at the end of the book of Deuteronomy. They'd given the law to Israel for the way that they should live, and then Moses starts to speak about some of the secret things that God is doing. This is in Deuteronomy 29:29. He says, "The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but those things which are revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may do all the words of this law." Moses says the things that have been revealed to us by God, we are responsible to act on those. But the secret things, the secret ways that God is working out through human history, those things belong to him, and they'll be revealed when they are revealed. There are just certain things that God is not going to let us know until the time comes. That's true with some of the big things about like when Jesus returns. The New Testament also talks about the fact that there was a great mystery that God hid for thousands of years, the mystery that God's kingdom was for everyone, not just for the people of Israel. The fact that the Gentiles are included in God's kingdom, that was hidden for a long time, and now it's been revealed to us. So there's certain big things like that God hides. But there are also specific things that God hides in your life where you're not going to know them until the right time for you to know them. Part of the reason for that is that we live in time and in space. I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know, but you live where you live, and you can't move forward into the future or backward into the past. You can't know the future. There are certain things that God has planned and set aside for you that you just don't know yet. You're not going to know until the time comes when you get there. I'm going to get a little personal with you and tell you some about my life. I became a believer when I was very young. My older sister led me to Christ when I was a little boy. And so I understood it at a rudimentary level. But over time, I kept walking with the Lord, and I came to a deeper understanding of who he was. And by the time I was at the end of middle school and early high school, I would say I was a pretty serious believer. I cared about what God wanted for my life. I wanted to know him. I wanted to walk with him. But as many of you know, you get to that period of your life when you're a young teenager and then through the end of high school and college, and you start to desire certain things. You start to notice people of the opposite sex. I wanted girls to like me. It didn't work out very well. There's things that you want at that stage. I started to realize, that I wanted to be married. I wanted to have kids. There's things I wanted for my future. And so I just had questions to God. God, what is it that you have set out for me for my future? I can't see it. What is it that you want me to do? And I remember just wrestling through this, and I felt like I was stumbling along in the dark. I was thinking, God, I want to know you. I want to follow you. Can you just give me a glimpse of what my future is going to be like? He didn't. He didn't tell me anything about it. And so I just felt so lost at certain times of this. Now, what I chose to do in that season of my life, so into middle school, high school, even college, and then through a little bit beyond that, I chose to trust the Lord and to walk with him with the things that I knew he had for me, and then to wait for whatever he had for me in my faraway future. But that was a real struggle for me when I went through that season of life. If some of you are that age, you may relate to what I'm talking about. There's another story of a girl. This was in the early 2000s. She was 12 or 13 years old, and she lived in Korea. She was in South Korea, and her family was about to move. So they lived in South Korea, but they were in their last summer there before they moved to a different country. And so this girl was trying to enjoy her last summer where she was living. So she and a friend were out shopping, and they were walking outside. And you've probably had this happen before where you're at an outdoor shopping place, and all of a sudden, it started to rain on them. Like a heavy rainstorm came through. And so they did the only thing they could do. They ducked into the first place that they could find. So they went into the first place they could find cover, and they walked into this dark room, and what they stumbled into was a small little church. Now, neither of these girls knew anything about Christianity. They didn't know anything about Jesus, but they saw these people worshiping, and it was so much a new thing to them that the first girl, she turned to her friend when she saw a statue of Jesus on the cross, and she asked, what are they doing to that man? Like, what are they doing in there? So she had no idea. Well, the people came and talked to them and said, well, we're Christians. We worship Jesus. We want to follow him and know him. This is what we do. We gather as the church. Well, it stopped raining outside, And the girl's friend said, let's get out of here. Let's go shop again. But the first girl said, I'm interested in this. And so she started asking questions. And for the rest of the summer that she was there, she kept going back to that little church. And by the time that it was time for them to move, she decided, I'm going to believe this. I'm going to follow Jesus, this girl. Now, keep in mind, this girl had no history with her family or anybody that she knew that were Christians. She just went in there because a rainstorm started, and then God got a hold of her heart right at that moment. Anyway, at the end of that summer, this girl, this 12 or 13-year-old girl, moved to a different country. She moved to China, and she started going to school, and she would occasionally, at each place she went, she would get plugged into a group of believers. And while she was in China, she went to school. She learned English while she was there. She graduated from high school and then went to college and then went to graduate school. And eventually, she went to go get another graduate degree in the United States. She went to Monterey, California, which is terrible weather if you've ever been there. I'm joking. It's super beautiful. So she went to Monterey, California, got a degree there, and at the end of her time, right before she graduated, she got a job in a different city. And so she knew a girl at her church in Monterey that was from the city where she was going. And so she asked, do you know of a church in Houston? Houston is where she was going. And the girl said, yeah, I do. I grew up when I was a little kid. I went to Second Baptist Church. She went to the Woodway campus. And so when this girl, this lady, moved to Houston, she saw that she was in the Galleria area. That's where she was working. And so she went to Second Baptist Church, the Woodway campus, and she went, listened to a sermon, probably much better than the one you're hearing right now. And at the end of it, she went up to the visitor reception, so like we have over here in this corner. She walked into the visitor reception, and the idiot there waiting for her was this guy. Now, I was not dressed as nicely as I am right now, but the person I'm talking about is my wife. That's my wife's story. It's how she came to faith in Christ when she was in Korea. I have a picture of my family here. Okay, that's great. So Elijah and Theodore are our two boys. The reason I'm telling you this story is this. I mentioned to you a moment ago that when I was a young person, I was kind of wrestling through, God, what is it that you have for my future? I can't see what's coming. Can't you just let me know? Can't you give me a glimpse of what's coming in the future? And the thing that I just want to point out to you is what I didn't know, what I couldn't see, is that God was already working on my wife across the world. My wife didn't even speak English when I was praying these things, asking God about my future. There's no way that we could have known that we would ever known each other. God had what was best in mind for me way before, and in a way more intense way than I could have ever realized was the case. I bring this up to tell you, I'm not saying that if you trust the Lord and walk with him that you're guaranteed to get a spouse, okay? That's not what I'm trying to tell you. What I am telling you is God requires that we walk with him and trust him and walk in faithfulness in the things that we do know, and he will work out and take care of the things that we can't see. You can't micromanage your life. God is working with information that you don't have, and there's certain things that are hidden from you, and God only asks that you walk with him in the things that you can see. Okay, let's move to another reason that sometimes we can't see what God is doing, and this one's a little more dangerous. We can't see when sin blocks our vision. When sin blocks our vision. There are times where we allow sin to creep into our life and be left unattended, and it keeps us from having insight and being able to see what God is doing in front of us. Jesus' primary opponents during his ministry were a group called the Pharisees. They cared about the Bible. They cared about the law of God. They wanted people to know it. But Jesus described them as blind people that were trying to teach and lead other blind people. He told them they couldn't see the truth, which is obvious, the fact that Jesus, the person that they were waiting for, was standing right in front of them, and they couldn't recognize him because they were blind. Their sin, their pride, their expectations kept them from seeing God when he was standing directly in front of them. It also makes me think of a story in the Old Testament, the first king of Israel, Saul. Saul had all the characteristics that you would expect of a good king. He was tall, handsome, a great warrior, charismatic, had qualities of a great leader. But Saul's issue is that he had unresolved sin in his life. He wouldn't repent when he was not walking with the Lord. And because of that, it blinded him. It kept him from knowing what God really wanted from him. During Saul's life, the main reason he would ever know what God wanted from him is that the prophet Samuel would tell him. Samuel would come and tell him, don't do this. Don't do that. You've displeased the Lord. Well, the time came where Samuel eventually died, and Saul had completely lost favor with the Lord. And Saul was desperate to know what the next right thing for him to do was. Now, I don't mean right as in morally right. I mean right as in he wanted to succeed. And so he did the only wise thing that he could do. He wanted to find out what God wanted, so he went and hired a witch to bring up Samuel's ghost to tell him what he wanted. Does that show you how blind Saul was in that moment? He was looking for direction from God, so he went to witchcraft to try and find it. That's how blind this guy was because of sin. Now, that sounds like a far extreme thing. But I do want to tell you that if you are allowing unattended sin to remain in your life unchecked, if there's an area of sin that you're not dealing with, you are allowing yourself to be blinded to what God actually wants you to do. I heard a story that I want to share with you because it made me laugh. There was a British naval commander named Horatio Nelson. He was alive a couple hundred years ago. I have a quote from him here where he says, "Gentlemen, when the enemy is committed to a mistake, we must not interrupt him too soon." He was a brilliant tactician. I've used that quote many a time for Mark Terry, my greatest enemy. I'm kidding. Horatio Nelson was a great military tactician, and he commanded people. So there was a time where he was in a battle, a naval battle, where he was not the one who was completely in charge. He was in charge of a group from this battle, but there was another person who was calling the shots. And Horatio was convinced that this guy, the commander, was a coward. And by the way, he was right about it. The guy was a coward. And Horatio knew what this battle was going to look like. And what Horatio said is if we attack, if we go forward and continue with what we're doing, we are going to win this battle. If we turn around and retreat, we're all going to die. That's what he knew. Now, the instructions that he was given was this. You are going to go attack, but if you see the signal sent up from the commander, a flare sent up in the air, then you have to turn around and retreat. Now, Horatio did not want to retreat. He knew that if they attacked, they would win. If they retreated, they would die. So the time came where he needed to look for the signal, and he took out one of these things. Now, by the way, I went big time, high budget on the props today. This is from Captain Longbeard a couple of years ago. They have these one-eye telescopes that they would use when they're seafaring. So the time came for him to look for the signal, and he put up his eye, looked at it, and said, "I don't see the signal. We're attacking." Now, what's interesting about this, they won the battle. This signal was sent in the air, but he also didn't see the signal. So how did he not see it? Well, the answer is pretty simple. Horatio, on purpose, took his telescope and put it up to his eye where he was blind. He had an eye where he was blind in it. And so he put it up to his blind eye, didn't see the signal, and he continued with the attack. Now, that's a silly and funny story. But if there's an area of your life right now where you have an area of sin that maybe it's sin that no one else knows about and you think it's not hurting anybody, and you're allowing it to be there and fester and you're keeping it, it is going to block your vision from seeing what God has for you. Maybe, let me put it to you this way. If you do have a sin in your life, say that no one knows about it or maybe a couple people know about it, but you're just thinking to yourself, well, this is just a part of my personality. You know, I have a hot temper by nature, and, occasionally I'm just going to flare up and unjustifiably yell at somebody in anger. But, that's just a part of who I am. I'm never going to be able to get rid of that. If you keep that, or say that you say I have a tendency toward being lustful, but no one knows about it, it's not hurting anybody, it's fine. There's nothing I can do about it anyway. This is just how God made me. If that is the attitude that you're having, do you think when the time comes that God has a person that he wants to put in your life for you to minister to or to reach out to or lead to the Lord, do you think you're likely to recognize and be sensitive to the Holy Spirit when those moments come? I would say no. If you leave sin unattended, it blinds your vision to what God is doing. We can't see when sin blocks our vision. So, we've established two things. One, that we can't see the things that God has hidden. And two, we can't see when our own sin blocks our vision. By the way, in Jeremiah chapter 17, it says, "The heart is deceitful and wicked above all things. Who can know it?" It doesn't matter how smart you are. If you have sin left in your life, it is deceitful. It blinds you. So if that's the case, if those are the things that we know, we can't see the things that God has hidden, but we also can't see when sin blocks our vision, what can we do to become more sensitive to be able to see what God is doing? And here's the thing that I want to leave us with. It's this. Discipleship is the thing that trains us to see with the eyes that God wants us to see with. We talked about the fact that Elisha could see all these incredible things. He saw the chariots of fire surrounding him. He saw Elijah taken up into the sky. How was he able to do that? I think there's a pretty easy explanation. He learned it from the person he learned from. He watched Elijah. He saw the way that God worked in his life. And so because of that, he was sensitive to be able to see when God was moving and doing things. Do you have a person in your life right now that is farther along in their walk with the Lord than you that you can learn from? Are the people that are pouring into your life the most, the people that you're listening to, the things that you are consuming, is it giving you a clear view of the world and what God is doing, or is it just giving extra noise and blocking your vision from where God wants you to go? Maybe even more significantly than that, are you being discipled by Jesus himself right now? Are you walking with him? In the Psalms, it says that the word of God, listening to it and knowing it, it's like a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. The purpose of a lamp or a light is so that you could see. what's in front of you. It illuminates and lets you walk. Walking with the Lord, being discipled by Jesus, that is the thing that allows you to have the ability to see what God is doing. Walking with the Lord, being discipled, that's what leads us to know him. Do you have a person in your life discipling you? Are you walking with Jesus? There's one last thing I want to talk about before we're done, and it's a story that I read. I read a biography a few years ago of a guy named Andrew Klavan, and he's an author, and what he does is he writes like tough guy mystery novels, but the thing I read from him was his autobiography. So he grew up, he was ethnically Jewish, and he came to faith in Christ over a long period of time. And in his story, there was an episode in his life where he was in a really rough period. He was in his 20s, and Andrew is a very gifted writer. He's an incredible writer, and at that stage of his life, though, he was getting no traction in his career. People were reading what he was writing, and they didn't like it. He wasn't getting published. He was having trouble making money. He was in a cycle of thinking really negative and destructive thoughts. He had destructive habits going on in his life. And one of the things that he was really frustrated with is that he felt a calling to do a certain thing. It was to write and to make things that people understood. But he felt like people didn't recognize his skill or his genius, which is so relatable to me. I mean, I just feel like all the time, no one recognizes my genius. I say these really witty, incredible things. No one recognizes it. Anyway, he was frustrated. He said there was a particularly dark night in his life, and he was sitting in his apartment. It was late at night. He had a baseball game on the radio, and he was listening to it quietly. And he said he was just there smoking cigarette after cigarette. And he said kind of a worm of a thought made its way into his brain. And he just kept repeating to himself, I don't know how to live. I don't know how to live. Frustrated with his work, frustrated with his life, angry with himself. I don't know how to live. And he said that night was the night among all the others in his life that he was seriously contemplating taking his own life. There was negative thoughts in his mind. There were things built up. He was so frustrated he couldn't see anything coming in front of him. He was listening to this baseball game on the radio, and for those of you who are young, that's how people used to listen to baseball games. Now I know you just watch the highlights at the very end, maybe, but then they would listen to it on the radio. And that night, it was a Mets game, and there was a catcher named, I'm going to get his name wrong, Gary Carter. Is that his name? Did I get it right? Okay, so Gary Carter was a catcher. And so Gary Carter was an outspoken Christian. And at the end of the game, he hit a ground ball. He legged it out and was safe at first base, and they won the game because of it. And after the game, the interviewer was interviewing him, and they asked him, Gary, you have terrible knees, which that's a terrible way to start an interview. You have terrible knees from catching all this time. What gave you the guts to just run that out and help you win the game? Now, in a lot of his interviews, Gary would say things like, he would attribute his success to God. I'm just so grateful to Jesus for the things that he's done. And Andrew said, as he was listening to that, keep in mind, he was not a believer at the time, he said, if he had said something like that, I would have just tuned it out and turned it off. That wouldn't have spoken to me at all. But instead, what Gary said that night is he said, sometimes you've just got to play through pain. And God used that statement from Gary to speak to Andrew Klavan's heart and his life. He had a ray of light come in where he just said, you know what, sometimes I do just need to play through pain. All the stuff that was dark and he couldn't see about the future, it started to become a little clear. Maybe I can get through this. And in Andrew's book, where he's describing this moment of his life, he says this. He says, the thing that I didn't know, the thing that I couldn't see at that moment, is that everything in my life was about to change within the next 2 or 3 weeks. That I was going to have a breakthrough in my career and my job. I was going to get published. I was going to win an award. I was going to make breakthroughs in my therapy with stuff I was dealing with internally in my thought life. All of a sudden, my life was going to be completely different 3 weeks later. But in that moment, he was actually thinking about taking his own life. The thing that I would say to you is this. There may be things going on in your life right now where you feel like you cannot see through the other side. You have no idea what's going to happen about the future. You can't see any way that things are going to be fixed. But maybe that moment where you are feeling the most down about yourself, when you are despairing over these things, maybe that means that God has something that you don't know about that is coming right around the corner. That was definitely true for Andrew Klavan. His life is totally different. He came to understand who Jesus was. He's a believer now. His life is full and meaningful, filled with work. But what if he had made a horrible decision in his despair? What would that have been like? So here's the thing I want to leave you with today. If you're in a place in your life where you feel like things are so difficult, or you feel like there's some sin that you can't get rid of, I don't see how this is ever going to get better in my life. I don't know how this relationship is ever going to get fixed. I would just maybe ask you this question. How do you know that the armies of the Lord are not surrounding you right now at this moment? And that maybe God has something planned for you that is coming sooner and better than you think. When I was 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, I was plugging along, complete idiot, unable to talk to girls entirely. I had no idea what God had planned for my future. I had no idea the things that he was getting ready for me, and neither do you. God is working on things that you cannot see. And my prayer for you today, and for me as well, is that God would open our eyes to see the world the way that he sees it. Maybe we don't have perfect vision of the things that he's doing. There's things that God is going to remain hidden. But I would pray that God would open your eyes so you could be sensitive to seeing the way that God is moving and stirring in your life. So I want you to think about the relationships in your life right now, the areas of sin maybe that you're struggling with, the things that you're doing in work or in school. And I want to ask you, thinking about what God is doing, what do you see?